Sup, guys? So back with you as usual. It is, what is it now? Tuesday, January 28th. I don't know what day of the week it is. I never know. 1-1 last night for a slight loss, but I mean, wasn't the worst day. Although, as you probably saw if you follow me on Twitter, definitely got frustrated with Iowa. I mean, they were the one loss. Obviously, it wasn't even close. Iowa. I'm beginning to think that they're an unbettable team right now, man, because they can't win at home as a favorite against a team in a huge letdown spot. That game against Minnesota. Last night against Ohio State in a huge letdown spot. Can't get it done. Get blown out of the building. It was close into the second half. Like, first half was close. Thinking, all right, they're going to hang in this game. And then, nope, they get absolutely destroyed in the second half. I think Ohio State at one point went on like a 21-5 run. It's just ridiculous. Arizona, however, did get there, and it was looking a little bit dicey at the end, looking like it was going to be an 0-2 night, and Caleb Love heroics, basically, hitting a three, I believe, to send the game into overtime, and then Arizona had a dominant overtime period. I'll take it. I also crushed the closing number on that one, at least. I had Arizona -1, and I think it went off like -2, 2.5, so... And luckily, all those numbers hit as well because Arizona wound up winning by like 11 in overtime. So I'll take it. And we'll move on to today. We got a decent-sized college basketball card here. I got 3 college basketball plays. I'll give some additional leans out. And I have 2 NBA plays, and I'm skipping NHL. So let's get right into it, man. We got St. John's and Georgetown up at 6:30. Eastern to kick off the slate tonight on Fox Sports 1 with the Big East. Number 15 ranked St. John's. St. John's is definitely a good team. They are the better team here, as the odds makers are telling you, as they're a 4.5-point favorite and up a little bit with juice. 62% of tickets on them, but 70% of the cash coming in on the Georgetown side. I don't really know what to do with this game, to be honest. St. John's likes to play a really fast-paced style of game. Georgetown, I don't believe, likes to do that. Georgetown is a bit slower pace, kind of mid-tempo. So Georgetown's probably going to try to slow St. John's down in this game. And I don't really see much of a situational angle here. St. John's did just complete a season sweep of Xavier. So that is a decent win. I mean, Xavier is a pretty good team in the conference. And they did already beat Georgetown a couple games before that by 5 at home. Not like an impressive win, not a blowout win or anything like that. But still, St. John's took care of business there. So maybe they're going to be looking ahead and have bigger things to deal with Providence up next, who they also already beat on the road, and then Marquette, UConn after that. So will they overlook Georgetown on the road in this spot? I don't know. It does look like the market is indicating on taking the points with Georgetown. I don't have much of a reason to disagree with it. I mean, Georgetown is potentially in a bounce-back spot after they had an ugly loss to Providence. They started not playing very well, but again, they lost to mostly good teams in here, and then kind of an inexplicable loss to DePaul mixed in there, which I lost on that game, unfortunately. So Georgetown may be in a little bit of a bounce-back spot here. They're back at home, and their last time they were at home, they lost to DePaul in that game, which was a game they really should not have lost. So maybe a little bit of extra motivation on the Georgetown side, bounce-back mode because of what happened the last time they were at home. They've lost their last 2 home games, actually. They haven't won at home since way back against Xavier here. So maybe a little bit of an edge to taking the points with Georgetown in that one. Kentucky and Tennessee, number 12 and number 8. It might look square, maybe, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab the points with Kentucky in this one. It's at 9.5 right now. I don't know if you can get a better number on this. It's up from 8.5 to 9.5. It might go even higher. I mean, it looks like money is coming in on Tennessee, but I don't agree with that. I like grabbing the points with Kentucky in this spot, man. Even though, you know me, I usually like the better defense. And yes, Tennessee is definitely the better defense. And they are the slower-paced team. But when you have the better defense and the team that likes to play grinding, slow games, that makes it more difficult. It's not a great situation for them to cover like a large spread, right? Like you'd rather have a team that can score a lot and play fast, like trying to cover a large number. If you're trying to cover a large number as a grinding defensive team, it's a little bit more difficult to do. So the points may be at a little bit more of a premium because of that. The total's at 148.5, up from 146. So it has gone up a little bit, which I'm fine with that too, because if it's fast-paced, that is Kentucky's style. So if Kentucky's able to speed up the game a little bit, I don't really hate that either. I just think the spot for Tennessee, as weird as it might sound, I don't like the spot for Tennessee here. Like, even though this is Tennessee, Kentucky, I actually think this looks like a sandwich spot to me. Tennessee's coming off a grinding game against Auburn where they lost by 2. I think Johnny Broom came back in the game for Auburn, and Auburn still struggled to score in this game. Tennessee had a nice defensive performance in this game. Both teams struggled massively on offense in this game, and it was a close game the whole way, and Auburn wound up winning the game at the end. So Tennessee lost to the number 1 ranked team by 2 points in the end in a close, grueling game. I mean, when you have a game like that, I actually think it does put you in a bit of a hangover spot after that, even though this is another big game against Kentucky, but it's not as big as that Auburn game was. That was a highly publicized game, man. It was like the game of the week, basically, like a college game day type of atmosphere there. Oh, yeah, and who does Tennessee have up next after they play Kentucky? They have Florida, and I'm sure we do not forget, Florida was the team that ended Tennessee's undefeated season earlier in the season, and not only did they do that, Tennessee went into Florida, and Florida embarrassed them completely and beat them by 30 points, held them to 43 points. So do you think Tennessee is going to have one eye kind of looking ahead to Florida, wanting revenge there, and Florida is also ranked 5th in the country? Yeah, I think they might. So as weird as it sounds, like I said, I think this is actually a sandwich spot for Tennessee here. I actually think Auburn and Florida surrounding this game, those are much, much bigger games. I don't know how Tennessee is going to bounce back off of that tough, physical, low-scoring game against Auburn. Florida up next, huge look-ahead spot as well. And Kentucky, I think they're going to be in an angry mood, man. I think they're going to be in a bounce-back spot. They've lost 2 in a row, and they just lost to Vandy. Yes, they are playing a second straight road game, but it's 2 games in the state of Tennessee. Not a lot of travel, but I think that loss to Vandy is going to refocus Kentucky. And I was on Vandy on Saturday because I said, man, Kentucky was coming off that big game against Alabama where they had almost beaten Alabama. They played 3 ranked teams in a row, big games, and they had this game against Tennessee up next. So I thought that was a sandwich spot for Kentucky, and they got caught in the sandwich. Now I think they're in the bounce-back spot, and I think Tennessee is in the sandwich spot. So give me Kentucky plus the points, even though, like I said, I know Tennessee is the better defense. Kentucky wants to play fast, and Tennessee will play very, very slow if they can. But again, better defense and slow team. It's not really conducive to covering a big number as a favorite. So for all those reasons, give me Kentucky plus the points in that first game there that I have. Next up is another game I'm going to play. And this one might look a little square too, and I'm still going to do it. I'm going to lay the 8 points with Louisville against Wake Forest in this one. People might think this game looks a little bit competitive, actually, though, so I don't know how square this really is. Although Louisville's down from 9 to 8, but I'm still going to come in and play what I think is the situation here. But again, the public might come in and look at this and think this looks like a competitive game, right? Like, both teams are 15-5. Wake has 2 conference losses, and one was to Duke in their previous game, which I'll talk about in a second because that's the main part of the handicap. Louisville, 1 loss in conference. To some degree, I think the public might look at this and think this line actually looks too high, but Louisville's been playing really well. They may not quite be deserving of being in the top 25, but I do think they're the second best team in the ACC right now to Duke. I mean, that's not saying much because the ACC is terrible, but Wake Forest, they just played Duke really close, man. Not only did they do that, but that game came on the heels of beating North Carolina. So Wake had 2 big games in a row against their 2 in-state rivals. 2 of their biggest games of the season. They beat North Carolina. Both of these games were on their home floor, too. And then they had the lead against Duke in the second half with 8 minutes left or so. They were winning this game, low-scoring game. They had come back, taken the lead, and then they fell just short in the end. And they were still within like 1 or 2 possessions in the final minutes of the game, and they fell just short against Duke. I don't know how Wake Forest gets back up off the mat after that, man. And they have to travel and go to Louisville. Doesn't look like a great spot to me for Wake, even though, yes, I know it is another ranked team. But when you have 2 huge games against North Carolina, teams like that, the big 2 North Carolina teams, I don't know how Wake is exactly going to respond to this. Louisville, yes, they're coming off a good win against SMU where they blasted SMU, but they just have momentum right now, man. They're just rolling right now, and I think they're just a train right now, and I think maybe it continues here. Wake, like I said, they're in a bad spot, and Louisville's just kind of continuing to roll right now, although they're rolling through some bad teams, although Clemson and Pitt are not bad. North Carolina's still not really that bad a team either. But, yeah, I like Louisville in this spot. Again, I think it's a hangover spot for Wake here. Louisville, they play a bit of a mid-tempo game here. I know they are ranked 84th in luck, so KenPom has them kind of high in luck index. Does have them as facing the 13th strongest schedule, though, in the country, and he does have them better than Wake significantly. He has Louisville at 25th, Wake all the way down at 73rd. He does have Wake playing a slow tempo at 218, and Louisville tries to play a little bit faster than that. He's got Wake with the better defense, but with the significantly worse offense. And Louisville not that much worse defensively either, actually. So Louisville is the significantly better team here, which is why they're laying a lot of points. The records might not tell you the full story here. Louisville can score more, which is also good if you want a team to cover a number like this. Yes, Wake will play defense, and they'll try to slow the game down, but Louisville's going to try to speed it up, and they're the team with the better offense, and that's what you're getting at home here. And then we got Louisville. KenPom doesn't have them as high in luck index at 84th. I already mentioned that. 84th in luck with 13th strength of schedule in the country, I think is what he's got them at, which is a very strong strength of schedule, whereas he's got Wake at 66th, which also isn't that bad, but he has Louisville as having the significantly stronger strength of schedule, and he has Wake luckier than Louisville at 29th in luck index. So both teams overperforming a bit, but Wake, the team that's overperforming more. Give me Louisville in that game, minus the 8. And then what else we got? South Carolina, Georgia is an SEC battle here. South Carolina's coming off a tough battle, a couple of tough battles in a row against Florida and Mississippi State, two ranked opponents that they played pretty close at home. So now they're having to go out on the road. Doesn't look like the greatest spot to me for South Carolina here. And last time they were out on the road, they lost by 20 to Oklahoma, which isn't that great. They also got destroyed on the road by Mississippi State by 35 points. Had a close loss at Vandy, but South Carolina has not been good on the road. They're coming off those two tough games. They do have ranked opponents coming up next against A&M, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Florida. So it is possible maybe they even overlooked Georgia as Georgia started struggling. Georgia had lost 4 games in a row, although it was to Tennessee, Auburn, Arkansas, which was in a sandwich spot, and I played Arkansas on that one, and then Florida. So Georgia has played some difficult games there, and 3 of those 4 games were also on the road, so kind of a difficult schedule. But now they're coming back home. They lost last time they were here, but they only lost by 2 the last time they were on their home floor against Auburn. They've played better at home, which is the case with a lot of teams, but they've won against Oklahoma and Kentucky on this floor. So I think it's a bounce back spot for Georgia here. They're coming off an embarrassing 30-point loss to Florida, even though, yeah, Florida's good, but that's kind of a rivalry game, and Georgia did not do well in that game at all. So I like the Georgia side in that game to some extent. That's the way I would look. They're down from 8 to 7.5, though, but that is the way that I would lean in that game, would be to the Georgia side there. We do have some interesting MAC matchups. Toledo is at Ohio. Ohio only laying 2.5, so odds makers are telling you that Toledo is actually a slightly better team there. Kind of interesting in that one. And you do have Kent State kind of in a weird spot because they just beat, they just lost to Ohio. Excuse me. So Ohio's coming up beating Kent State. So Ohio could be in a little bit of a letdown spot because that was a big win over Kent State. Kent State just had that game losing to Ohio after they beat Toledo, and they played Miami, Ohio before that, and they got Akron up next. So this kind of looks like a sandwich spot. Akron's the top team in the conference here. So that's kind of a look ahead, and they're coming off that tough game against Ohio. So possible Kent State overlooks Bowling Green. So I would lean to taking the points with Bowling Green, but Kent State's up from 12 to 12.5, so I don't quite want to do that. And then kind of a similar spot for Akron. Akron is just on a roll right now, and they just blasted Miami, Ohio, which was a huge game for them. Dealing Miami, Ohio their first conference loss. Both teams are sitting atop the conference undefeated. Huge win for Akron in that game, and they do have Kent State up next, which is a big game. Going on the road to face Northern Illinois. I would lean to taking the points with Northern Illinois, but Northern Illinois is a terrible team, so I'm not going to come in and do that. And Akron is up from 15 to 16 with juice. I think just because Northern Illinois is that bad. But it doesn't seem like the greatest spot to come in and try to play Akron in that game, so I'm not going to do it. And maybe Miami, Ohio is in a little bit of a hangover spot because they were rolling. They'd won every game in conference so far. They've won a ton of games in a row. They're not really used to losing, and they just got blasted by Akron. So that's the type of game that can hang you over a little bit. So I would not want anything to do with Miami, Ohio in this game either. They're down from 11.5 to 11, so the line has moved against them and towards the Eastern Michigan side in that one. So some MAC action there for you. I lean against Minnesota. I mean, I don't know how they're doing this. They've won 3 ridiculous games in a row, upsetting Michigan on a 3-pointer at the buzzer, going on the road, upsetting Iowa in what should have been a letdown spot and beating me. Then they beat Oregon, another ranked opponent, pulling off that upset too. So 3 straight upsets for Minnesota. Now they go on the road to face Michigan State. I think this is probably where it ends. I think Michigan State will probably get the better of them. Michigan State, I know everybody knows they're good. They've just been completely rolling, but Michigan State had a kind of tough game in their last game. Well, a game where they didn't play up to standards, really, because they were coming off that big win over Illinois. So I faded Michigan State, and luckily I got a better number on this because Rutgers just came in within the number there, plus a 7.5 there for me. And that game I thought was going to be in Rutgers' home stadium, and it was not. It was actually at Madison Square Garden. So it was only a semi-home game for Rutgers. Very weird. But Michigan State somewhat escaped in that game. So I think Michigan State's probably in a little bit of a better spot here. And they don't really have anything that big upcoming, even though, yeah, I know they're traveling to the Pacific Coast. But I think they will still show up for this game. They did already beat Minnesota on the road, though, by 18 points. So that's one hesitation that I have, where it is a little bit of a road, in-season road revenge angle for Minnesota, because Minnesota knows Michigan State went in and beat them on their own floor. But Michigan State is a significantly better team here. And Minnesota, like I said, how long can they continue doing this? Winning all these games in upset fashion in a row. I don't know that it continues. Michigan State's up from 13 with even money up to 13 straight. 75% of tickets, 98% of the cash. Looks like some of the money's coming in on Michigan State. I would agree with that side. I slightly lean to the Michigan State side in that one. And for Minnesota's luck to finally run out, let's say. Minnesota also does like to play really slow, and Michigan State plays a bit faster tempo than that this year. So Michigan State can play a lot of different styles, but that's another reason why maybe Minnesota kind of just runs out of steam in this game here. If Michigan State's going to try to tire them out and run the floor against them, and Minnesota does not want to play that style. So interesting game. And next up is my final play in college basketball, which is UCF plus 13.5. I'm going to fade Kansas in this game. Kansas is down from 14 to 13.5. They're public, 80% of tickets and only 59% of the cash. So it looks like some reverse line movement against Kansas, which is what I like to see, even though I don't love coming in and playing games with big numbers like this. A lot of times I'd prefer to lay a big number than to take it. But in this case, I'm going to fade Kansas in this one. Again, it looks like they are public as well, and less of the money on them than the ticket percentage, which tells you some of the bigger money's coming in against them. I think this is a spot to fade Kansas, man. I mean, we know what they're coming off of. They just played Houston and blew the game in epic fashion against Houston. That was a huge game. That was Kansas's second biggest game of the season besides Iowa State. It was their chance to get like a really statement win, although they do have one against Duke earlier in the season, but they don't have any statement wins in conference yet. Losing to Iowa State, and now they had this game against Houston, man. If you saw this game, it was crazy. Kansas had a 6-point lead with like 13 seconds left in overtime. They missed 2 free throws. They weren't even in the 1-and-1. They missed both free throws. Houston hit an off-balance 3 to cut it to 3 with 7 seconds left. Then Kansas, all they got to do is inbound it, and they're going to get intentionally fouled again. And they threw away the inbound pass. Houston got the ball again, steal basically off the inbound, and hit another 3 to tie it. Kansas did not score in the remaining like second or two. It went into double overtime at that point, and then Houston wound up winning in double overtime. Absolutely insane. If you're Kansas, you had Houston completely on the ropes in that huge game. How do you get up off the mat after that? I don't know how you do it. I don't see it. I don't think Kansas can really get back up off the mat after that. And they're playing a UCF team that, by the way, they went into UCF and beat them by 51 points. And that was a game where I actually played Kansas in that game, and it was one of the easiest wins I've ever had. As square as it looked at the time, I laid like 4.5 with Kansas. Kansas was coming off that ugly home loss to West Virginia, and UCF had just played, I think, Houston really close or something like that. I forget what it was, but UCF was in a bad spot, man. They just played a really tough game, and Kansas absolutely throttled them. So now it is in-season road revenge for UCF this time. You don't think UCF is going to remember that? UCF got totally embarrassed on their own floor by this Kansas team. They're definitely going to want to put in a better performance this time. And on the other hand, like I said, Kansas might completely overlook UCF this time because they absolutely annihilated them the other time, on the road no less. They're coming off that just awful way of losing that game against Houston in a huge game. And they do have Baylor up next and Iowa State, and those are two huge games. Baylor's right behind them in conference standings, and we know how good Iowa State is. Those are two huge games on the horizon there, and their rivalry against Kansas State up after that. So this is a sandwich spot big time. This is a huge sandwich here in this Big 12 slate here. This is the one game that Kansas may overlook the most on the schedule right now, man. This is a bad spot for Kansas. UCF, they just got a win, and I know they had a win. It was a blowout win, but I don't think they're going to be feeling like totally overconfident because this is Kansas, man. So even though, yeah, they just beat TCU by almost 30, and they are having to travel into Kansas from Florida, but UCF, that win kind of rights the ship for them. It was a win that they should have gotten. TCU's not good. UCF was the favorite in that one. UCF, that ended their two-game loss streak, so that's not bad for them. And like I said, UCF, actually, they were coming off, they'd beaten Texas Tech, coming into the game against Kansas. So they beat a ranked Texas Tech team at the time, so that they were in the letdown spot of the Texas Tech game, is what UCF did. And then I did play against UCF after they played Houston as well, and they got blasted by Iowa State in that game. I won on that game, too, on Iowa State. UCF was coming off that tough game against Houston, but now I think UCF, that win against TCU, I think is just going to give them new momentum. It'll break that losing momentum they had, break that bad loss they had against Iowa State. Not really a bad loss, but a loss by a lot of points nonetheless. And I think they're absolutely going to be focused going into Allen Fieldhouse here, man, to face the team that beat them by 51 on their own floor. Absolutely embarrassing. Their most embarrassing loss of the year, probably, even though it was to a good team. I think you're going to get a much better effort out of UCF in this one. And yes, I know UCF is the worst team, and they do like to play fast. I know KenPom has them ranked very lucky, 14th in the country, 26th strength of schedule, though, so they face a very difficult schedule. Yes, I know UCF plays really fast, 32nd in tempo in the country, and Kansas is going to try to slow them down. Kansas is at 147th. They play mid-tempo. Kansas, I know, has been way less lucky at 246th. So the luck factor does not appear to be on the side of UCF, but I still just think the situation absolutely calls for this play. You can't always fade every single thing you see on KenPom, man. And Kansas does have the 6th strength of schedule, but both teams face a very difficult schedule so far. And Kansas, if they try to slow the game down, that's going to make it more difficult for them to cover a big number like this. Just like I said with Tennessee, if you know you got a team that likes to play fast and you're going to try to slow them down, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to cover that number. And Kansas is more of a defensive-oriented team as well, so that might be more conducive to this being a lower-scoring game as well here. They just played a game that was kind of misleadingly high scoring because it went into double overtime against Houston. The total is high in this one, though, up from 150.5 up to 152, so it is a high total. But if UCF is going to try to run and try to make it fast, at least that is the type of game that they kind of like to play. So that's what we got going on there. I'll take the points with UCF in that one. We do have two interesting 8-10 matchups, with VCU being a 6.5-point road favorite at St. Louis and Dayton a 2.5-point road favorite at St. Bonaventure. So the odds makers are telling you VCU and Dayton are the better teams in these games, even though it looks like that may not be the case. If you look at just their records and whatever, it looks like these should be competitive matchups for the odds makers, and they should be still. These are going to be good games, but the odds makers are telling you VCU is so much better than St. Louis that they're laying 6.5 on the road, and Dayton, despite having a slow start to conference play, they're better than St. Bonaventure to the tune of being a 2.5-point road favorite. So I would tend to prefer both road favorites here. Dayton's up from 1 to 2, although they have 75% of tickets, 62% of the cash. so less of the cash on them. And VCU's up from 6 to 6.5 with 75% of the tickets, so a little bit public, but 91% of the cash. So to me, it looks like the line is moving in both of those teams' directions. That's the way I look there. Marquette is at Butler. Number 9, Marquette. Marquette's coming off a pretty big win over Villanova, and they do have UConn and St. John's up next. So those are big games. So they may overlook Butler a little bit, and they did already beat Butler at home by 10 points. So it is possible Marquette doesn't totally take Butler seriously in this game. So I would lean to the Butler side in this one, as ridiculous as that kind of looks, as Butler's record is terrible. I know Marquette is the way better team, but Butler, they were able to right the ship with a win over DePaul, where I thought that was a bad spot for Butler, sandwiched in between a really close game against UConn and this game against Marquette. And I lost on DePaul in that game. DePaul did not do well. Butler got it done, got the win, so Butler will have a little bit of momentum coming into this game at the very least. And maybe Butler will try to slow the game down a little bit on Marquette or whatever they might try to do. But I would lean to taking the points with Butler. I mean, it does look a bit too easy to lay it with Marquette. Marquette's down from 7.5 with juice down to 7, so the money's come in against them a little bit, it looks like. So that's the way I lean there. Oklahoma's playing Texas A&M. I got to try to get this done, man. There's a lot of games here on this Tuesday slate. I don't have any more plays, but some of these games are interesting. Oklahoma, second straight road game. They did lose at home to Texas A&M, though, so they may still have focus on Texas A&M, try to get a little bit of road in-season revenge here against Texas A&M. It will be a big game for them. They are at least on a 2-game win streak. Beating Arkansas, even though it is John Calipari, they haven't played that well, so that they may not consider that to be that big a win. And Texas A&M is coming off blowing a 22-point second-half lead against Texas. Texas had a huge comeback in that game. That was a big rivalry game. The way Texas A&M blew that game, I don't know, man. And coming off a big win over Ole Miss, too, blowing that big rivalry game like that against Texas, they might not be in the greatest spot coming off of that. So I would slightly look Oklahoma's way in this one. Texas A&M down from 8.5 to 8. And the other good thing about if you want to take the points is that Texas A&M plays slower and they play a defensive style, so that's less conducive to them covering a large number. So seems like Oklahoma would be the way to lean in that game slightly. Baylor is at BYU. Baylor's playing a second straight game in elevation after winning in Utah. Not an easy spot. Second straight road game in high elevation. And then they have Kansas and then Texas Tech up next. That Kansas game is going to be really big. So it could be a look-ahead spot here as well. So I like the BYU side in this game to some extent. I think it's not a very good spot for Baylor. BYU just housed Cincinnati, though. But does that mean they're going to be feeling really high on themselves? I don't know. When you beat anybody by almost 30 points, you may be feeling a little bit cocky, but it is still Baylor coming into their place. And I think they do know how good Baylor is. Baylor's ahead of them in the standings right now. So I don't really think BYU is going to be in an overconfident mode. BYU's up a little bit from 3 with juice to 4 with reduced juice. Maybe like a little slight move up on BYU there. And people are going to look at this and maybe think the line doesn't look right. Like, how is BYU laying 4 points against Baylor? And they may think that it makes sense to actually come in and take Baylor in that game, but I don't agree with that. I would look to the BYU side, and then we do have North Carolina at Pittsburgh. UNC coming off barely escaping against BC, which I think BC took them into overtime in Chapel Hill, which is just crazy. And now North Carolina's coming off that, going on the road to face Pitt, and they do have Duke up next, which is a pretty major look-ahead spot. So it may not be the greatest spot for North Carolina, even though they almost lost the game they shouldn't have lost. So that might scare them back into focus, shock them back into focus. But I don't know, because with Duke up next, it is possible they actually look ahead to Duke. Pitt just broke their losing streak. They just had a bad 4-game losing streak, and they won against Syracuse to try to right the ship there. So that might help Pitt a little bit and give them some momentum coming into this one. Pitt's up from 2 with juice to 4, so some money looks like it has come in on the Pitt side. And I do think they are actually still the slightly better team over UNC. So I wouldn't disagree with that side. And I like the Gonzaga side to get a little bit of revenge against Oregon State here. Oregon State, they beat Gonzaga not that long ago on their home floor. Gonzaga was a 9-point road favorite in that one too. So kind of crazy there. Oregon pulled off the upset, and then Oregon was in the letdown spot after that loss to San Francisco. I was on San Francisco in that one. I believe it might have been, was it revenge as well? No, it wasn't, but it was a letdown spot. Then they righted the ship. They beat Pepperdine, who suck. Then Oregon State won for me again. I got this game right as well. I got it right. Fading Oregon State with the San Francisco play, and then I got Oregon State right playing on them against Santa Clara. They got the revenge against Santa Clara. Big win there. Now it's Gonzaga who's going to be in revenge mode, man. And Oregon State has to go up to Spokane, Washington. Gonzaga's new to this, or Oregon State's new to this conference, so they're not used to having to go up to Spokane, so they might be in a little bit of an unfamiliar spot here, and Gonzaga's going to be looking for revenge. Gonzaga was laying 9 on the road, although I think that line was a little bit too high. Gonzaga just got an easy win over Portland to kind of try to right the ship after they lost to Oregon State, and they lost to Santa Clara after that. So the public might come in and think, well, this line looks way too big. Like, how is Gonzaga laying 13.5 when Oregon State already beat them once, and Gonzaga just lost to Santa Clara, and Oregon State just beat Santa Clara? So it looks like you should be taking the points with Oregon State here. I would not do that. Gonzaga's up from 13 with juice to 14. I would lean to the Gonzaga side in this one. The problem is KenPom only has this line at about 10, even though he does have Gonzaga as the significantly better team still. Gonzaga actually is better than they look right now, in my opinion. I think they're still like a pretty good team. I think they're deserving of being ranked in the top 25, to be honest. So for all those reasons, I do like the Gonzaga side in that one a little bit, but the line is a little bit too high for me to want to come in and actually lay it, according to KenPom's numbers at the very least. So I'll stay away, as he has them at about a 10-point favorite in this game. But I do think they are the correct side in that game. Oh, and by the way, Kansas, if they were laying 4.5 on the road at UCF, 13.5 is definitely a bit of a high number. Although I think KenPom does have this line at about 13, but still, that's still the way I lean there. And then I think he has Kentucky, that line around 8 or 9. And I think he has Louisville right around with the numbers as well. So not a whole lot else to see there. All right, NHL. I don't know what I want to say about the NHL, man. And we do have Boston coming off a big win over Colorado. They just beat the Avs. And they got Winnipeg up next. So it looks like a little bit of a sandwich spot, having to go on this one-game road trip to Buffalo. Pretty weird spot for my Boston Bruins, but Buffalo's returning home from a road trip. So Buffalo's in a bad spot, too. They were just in the Pacific Northwest. They've been on the road for over a week, so a lot of times that can be a distracted spot. And they just played Edmonton to within 1 on the road. So I don't like the spot for either team in that game, so I will pass completely in that game. Boston, it looks like Buffalo's flipped from plus 102 to minus 109, so Buffalo has flipped to the favorite in the game, but I don't know how to gauge that game, really. Tampa Bay, I do think, is in kind of a bad spot as they are returning home from a road trip. They were on the road trip for a while, even though they didn't do well on the road trip, but I just don't think it's a great spot whenever a team returns home from a road trip like that. Chicago did just lose to Tampa on the road trip as well, and then they did lose to Minnesota after that, but maybe a little bit of quick road revenge for Chicago here. So I would slightly lean to the Chicago side. Tampa's up from minus 320 to minus 335. So you can probably take like a huge puck line on Chicago if you do agree with that side. I don't mind that side. Carolina is at the Rangers. I mean, this is a big game as the Rangers starting to play a little bit better recently, at least. Carolina coming off an overtime loss to the Islanders with a couple days off. Now, it's a pretty bad loss, really. So I think you're going to see Carolina be in kind of a bounce back mode here. So I kind of lean to the Carolina side here. The Rangers are coming off a tough loss to Colorado. That game was close late in the game, and the Rangers lost on a late goal to Colorado. Even though I know they're going to step it up when it's Carolina, that was still a tough game. Playing 2 tough games in a row. Carolina's a little bit of extra rest here, and Carolina's coming off the more embarrassing loss. So I lean to Carolina. The market appears to agree with me on that. They're up from minus 130 to minus 135. 97% of the cash on them. 73% of tickets coming in on the Rangers, who look like they're playing better now. So the public seemingly kind of liking the Rangers at a home underdog price, but I actually don't agree with it. And then the other big game is Dallas-Vegas. This is probably the biggest game on the entire slate. Big Western Conference matchup here. Dallas coming off that win over St. Louis a few days ago, they never should have won. As I said, I mean, Dallas had their backup goalie in there. St. Louis totally dominated the game statistically, and they couldn't get anything through on Dallas. And Dallas was coming off beating Vegas the game before that. So they were in a Vegas sandwich. So it is a little bit of revenge for Vegas here, although I do think Dallas is going to show up in this game as well. Both teams are going to show up. It's going to be a big game, but Vegas may be a little bit extra motivated just because it is a little bit of quick revenge for them. But they're coming off a big win over Florida. So they're coming off the tougher game, and they have less rest as that was on Sunday. So they only have one day of rest, where Dallas has two, although Dallas was in St. Louis and they're returning home. But still, tough read in this game, man, because Vegas does have a little bit of the extra motivation maybe, but Vegas coming off that bigger win over Florida, maybe that would have me slightly leaning the other way then towards Dallas. Vegas down from minus 125 to minus 111. 60% of tickets and 62% of the cash on them, but the line has moved against them. So it looks like some significant money coming in on the Dallas side. And maybe I would actually agree with it. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Looking at NBA, I got two plays, and I guess those will be the only games I'll actually talk about. I don't really care that much about this small NBA slate, but I do have two plays, even though it's only 4 games. Atlanta plus 6 or 6.5 or whatever you can get on this is going to be the first play. Houston is up from 6 to 6.5. It looks like it's going towards 7. If you can get 7 on this, definitely have at it. Maybe we could just wait on this number and get a better number on this. Both teams played yesterday, but look what Houston did yesterday, man. They were up in Boston, and they got their quick revenge against Boston. Not only did they do that, but look at what they're off of. They beat Cleveland twice in a home and home. Then they beat Boston. So they beat Cleveland on the road. They beat Boston on the road. The two best teams in the Eastern Conference, basically. Now, on a back-to-back, third game in 4 days, all on the road, all in different cities. They have to go down and play Atlanta, and this game got kind of thrown in the mix here because this game was supposed to be played on January 11th, and it got moved because of ice, because everybody is a huge pussy now, and nobody can play just because of ice in Atlanta. So now this game is thrown into a sandwich spot here, and they do have Memphis up next, and I know they just beat Memphis twice surrounding that ice postponement as well, but that's going to be a bigger game, I think, too, man. Atlanta hasn't really been playing that great. But Houston, I mean, this is a sandwich spot big time. They're coming off 3 giant wins in a row over Cleveland and Boston. Bad scheduling spot, too, with all this travel, all these road games jammed in there. And with Memphis up next, I think this is a really bad spot for Houston. Playing a team that's below 500 in the mix here, too. Atlanta, they're on a big loss streak, 5 losses in a row. So I think you're going to see a focused Atlanta team. Yes, they're on a back-to-back as well with travel. Yes, they're playing a third game in 4 days as well, but all the other games that they played recently were at home, except for this one weird trip up to Minnesota yesterday. And yeah, that's a big game. I mean, playing at Minnesota, but Minnesota beat them. The game was never really that close, so it's not like Atlanta took them to the wire or anything like that. Houston's win yesterday was much bigger. Houston has way more travel here. Atlanta, I think, is just trying to get a win any way they can right now, so I expect Atlanta will show up in this game. I like it for Atlanta. You got to look at Trae Young, as he's a game-time decision. So hopefully he is going to play in this game. But if he doesn't, I still kind of like the spot for Atlanta, to be honest. Trae Young didn't play in the last game because of a hamstring, so hopefully he will play in this one, even though it would be a reverse injured player theory spot. If you can get the number with Atlanta right now, I think if it is announced that he is going to play, I think the line at that point has to come down a little bit. So you may wind up getting the better number on Atlanta if you play it shortly and try to get the 7, but play it, shortly, and then you'll get that better number there. And Atlanta, by the way, they've been like a giant killer at the very least. They've beaten some of the best teams in the NBA this year. They've beaten Boston. They've beaten Cleveland multiple times, I think. So Atlanta, on any given day, they can beat anybody in the NBA. So for all those reasons, give me Atlanta. I think it's a bad spot for Houston. And then my other play right before I get out here real quick, I know this is ugly, but Portland plus 6 in this one. This line looks like it's moving against the Bucks. They're down from 7 to 6. Unfortunately, I never saw the 7. They're public, 68% of tickets, only 52% of the cash. The line is reversed, moving against the public Bucks team here. I think this is a bad spot for the Bucks. They're in a back-to-back. They're playing a third game in 4 days, fourth game in 6 days, 5 games in 7 days, actually. That game was postponed. Never mind, sorry. So fourth game in 6 days, because that New Orleans game was postponed because of ice in New Orleans. Yeah, whatever. Again, everybody's a bitch. Milwaukee, 4 games in 6 days, though, all in different cities. Very, very difficult spot for them. And they're coming out of elevation, too. I know beating Utah is not impressive, but still, they were on the Pacific Coast on Saturday. And then they had to go into elevation, beat Utah. Now they're coming back to the Pacific Coast to play Portland before they have to go play Wemba. And that's a team that might draw their focus a bit more, man. San Antonio, I mean, Portland, one of the lesser teams in the NBA. I think it's pretty easy to overlook Portland if you're a Milwaukee in a spot like this, and it's a bad scheduling spot like I just pointed out. Portland, on the other hand, they returned home from a road trip in their last game. They lost to Oklahoma City. I know they came within the number and only lost by 10 as 13.5-point dogs, but still, I don't think that was a great spot. The return home spot is never that great a spot, and they didn't play like that close against Oklahoma City. And a lot of times, like I say, when you lose that first game back from a road trip, a lot of times you bounce back and you play a lot better in the next game. And I think that's the spot that Portland is in, even though, yeah, losing to Oklahoma City is not embarrassing. Only losing to them by 10 is not embarrassing, but still, Portland was on a nice little mini run here, and they beat Miami and Orlando in the mix there. So they were playing decent basketball. They haven't been totally getting wrecked or anything like that. So I think Portland can show up and play a competitive game here. Give me Portland plus the points in that one as well. The market seems to be indicating on it. And that's going to do it for me, man. My plays today, one more time. College basketball, Kentucky plus 9.5, Louisville -8, UCF plus 13.5, NBA Atlanta plus 6, Portland plus 6. That's going to do it for me. Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast, patreon.com/Tower Gang. Bonus content, and come join us tomorrow for a new super offensive, hilarious show as usual. And that's going to do it, man. Bonus content if you subscribe to the Patreon, pre-show, post-show, and hang out with us in the Telegram. Tower Gang, baby. Peace.